Chapter 4. A history of seers and their gifts. And whosoever has these things is called seer, after the manner of old times. Messiah 28:16. In certain ages of the world seers were commonly known, and occasionally many seers lived at the same time. Egypt was a land famous for men with this rare gift. Joseph was considered the most honored and respected seer, because his ability of seership was greater than that of all other seers. We learn from the Babylonians there was a word arik in the Sumerian language, which signifies "a seer." Joseph of Egypt was a seer of seers, and it was in virtue of his seership that Pharaoh had raised him to the dignity next to his own. Egypt was especially the land of the seers. Joseph of Egypt, page 112. Enoch also was a man endowed with great spiritual power and was a famous seer. Although he was a friend of God, he was much less respected by his fellow men. And all men were offended because of him, Enoch, and they came forth to hear him upon the high places, saying unto the tent keepers, Tarry ye here and keep the tents, will we go yonder to behold the seer, ere he prophesieth, and there is a strange thing in the land, a wild man hath come among us. Gen. 640, Inns. Version. In the meridian of time there was a sect of the Jewish people who were gifted with spiritual endowments. Seership was the ultimate objective in their lives. They were called Essenes, which is interpreted to mean seers. Essenes, a Jewish sect, who, according to the description of Josephus, combined the ascetic virtues of the Pythagoreans and Stoics, with a spiritual knowledge of the divine law. It seems probable that the name signifies seer, or the silent, the mysterious. As a sect the Essenes were distinguished by an aspiration after ideal purity, rather than by any special code of doctrines. There were isolated communities of Essenes, which were regulated by strict rules, analogous to those of the monastic institutions of a later date. All things were held in common, without distinction of property, and special provision was made for the relief of the poor. Self-denial, temperance and labor, especially agriculture, were marks of the outward life of the Essenes. Purity and divine communion were objects of their aspiration. Slavery, war and commerce were alike forbidden. Their best-known settlements were on the northwest shore of the Dead Sea. Smith's Bible Dictionary, page 181. The Book of Mormon also records examples of this ability to see things past and present. Nephi was a seer, and when he rebuked the judges and the Gadiantans, the judges were angry with him because he spake plainly unto them concerning their secret works of darkness. Some of them said, He knoweth as well all things which shall befall us as he knoweth of our iniquities. Nephi then told them their own chief judge was dead and lying in his own blood. They thought that Nephi must have agreed with someone to slay the judge. But Nephi said, Because I showed you this sign ye are angry with me, and seek to destroy my life. Behold, I will show unto you another sign. He then told them to go to the house of Sentum and accuse him of the murder, but they shall find blood upon the skirts of his cloak, and he shall tremble, and shall look pale, even as death had come upon him. And then should they say to him, Do we not know that it is the blood of your brother? And then shall he tremble, and shall look pale, even as death had come upon him, and the words which he had said were true. See Helaman chap. 9. Nephi could see these things occur although he was far from them as they happened. The brother of Jared did molten out of rock 16 small stones, and they were clear, even as transparent glass. Then he prayed to the Lord, saying, And I know, O Lord, that thou hast all power, and can do whatsoever thou wilt for the benefit of man. Therefore touch these stones, O Lord, with thy finger, and prepare them that they may shine forth in darkness, and they shall shine forth unto us in the vessels which we have prepared, that we may have light while we shall cross the sea. Ether 3:4. The Lord touched the stones and caused the stones to shine in darkness, to give light unto men, women, and children, that they might not cross the great waters in darkness. Ether 6:3. Then the Lord either gave the brother of Jared 2 more stones or endowed 2 of the 16 stones to become interpreters, and to be used as Urim and Thummim. He said, These 2 stones will I give unto thee that they would magnify to the eyes of men the things which the brother of Jared wrote. The Lord then made a choice seer out of him, and that there never were greater things made manifest than those which were manifest to the brother of Jared. Ether 4:4. In ancient Israel, seers were consulted for the answers to many problems in both temporal and spiritual affairs. When men desired to know the will of God, they would inquire of God through a seer. Before time in Israel when a man went to inquire of God, thus he spake, Come, let us go to the seer, for he that is now called prophet was before time called a seer. Isam 9:9. These seers were able to see or receive visions by the use of seer stones, a rod the Urim and Thummim, or by open vision. Seer's rod. Among the instruments used by seers is found mention of a rod. The terms of a shepherd's rod and staff as mentioned in the 23rd Psalm, were synonymous with the great shepherd of Israel. The rod and staff being the ensigns of power and government, as well as instruments for punishing offenders. Curtin's Concordance, page 497. The Lord is to rule with a rod of iron, Rev. 2:27. Under Moses' dispensation it was Aaron who used the rod to smite the waters of Egypt, Acts 7:19, and to swallow up the rods of the Egyptians which were transformed into snakes, Acts 7:12. Moses used the rod for a blessing to Israel by smiting the rock to obtain the much-needed water, Acts 17:6, and it was also used in determining the tithing of the Israelites, Lev. 27:32. Each tribe of Israel was to have a rod with their name upon it, and one of these rods was to blossom on the following morning. Aaron's rod brought forth buds, and bloomed blossoms, thus showing his rod to be for the head of the house of their fathers, Num. 17:5. In the first editions of the Book of Commandments, Oliver Cowdery was given the gift of working with the rod. Now this is not all, for you have another gift, which is the gift of working with the rod. Behold, it has told you things. Behold, there is no other power save God, that can cause this rod of nature to work in your hands, for it is the work of God, and therefore whatsoever you shall ask me to tell you by that means, that will I grant unto you, that you shall know. Joseph begins his work, page 19. Compare D&C 8:6-9. Jasher speaks about a sapphire stick which had the name of the Lord God of hosts engraved thereon, and was handed down from creation through many generations to the time of Joseph. Possibly this was similar to the rod. And this was the stick with which all the works of our God were performed, after he had created heaven and earth, and all the host of them, seas, rivers and all their fishes. And when God had driven Adam from the Garden of Eden, he took the stick in his hand and went and tilled the ground from which he was taken. And the stick came down to Noah and was given to Shem and his descendants, until it came into the hand of Abraham the Hebrew. And when Abraham had given all he had to his son Isaac, he also gave to him the stick. And when Jacob had fled to Padan Aram, he took it into his hand, and when he returned to his father, he had not left it behind him. Also when he went down to Egypt, he took it into his hand and gave it to Joseph, one portion above his brethren, for Jacob had taken it by force from his brother Esau. Jasher 77:42-47. A seer's rod or stick may have been a receptacle to which a seer stone was attached. Since Oliver Cowdery was to use this rod and receive communication from the Lord, we can assume that it was an instrument used to convey revelations. The Lord said pertaining to that rod, he could tell you by that means, and that it has told you things. So whatever may be said of the rod, it was an instrument which was used in knowing and accomplishing the will of God. Urim and Thummim. Many prophets possessed the Urim and Thummim. It was because of these instruments that they were distinguished as seers. Some of these seers who possessed the Urim and Thummim were Abraham, ... And I, Abraham, had the Urim and Thummim, which the Lord my God had given unto me. ... Abraham, 3:1. Abraham sought the Lord diligently, and finally he had given unto him a Urim and Thummim, in which he was enabled to obtain a knowledge of many things that others were ignorant of. I think the meaning of the name of this instrument is light and perfection, in other terms, communicating light perfectly, and intelligence perfectly, through a principle that God has ordained for that purpose. John Taylor, J.D. 24:262. Brother of Jared. ... When the brother of Jared was coming to this land, the Lord gave him some very remarkable visions, and among other things he gave him the Urim and Thummim, prepared 2 crystal stones and 2 rims of a bow, and sanctified them, and showed to the brother of Jared many marvelous things. Orson Pratt, J.D. 19:208. Noah. ... Noah, after having preached the gospel and published glad tidings among the nations, was commanded to build an ark. He had a Urim and Thummim by which he was enabled to discern all things pertaining to the ark and its pattern. J.D. 1650. Moses and Aaron. ... The Urim and Thummim, used by Moses and Aaron, was attached to a breastplate. This was called the breastplate of judgment, and for significant reasons. The reason of this was that Aaron was appointed to be a judge among the children of Israel, occupying a similar place among that people that the president of the bishopric occupies in the church. But he was blessed above those who have been ordained to the same calling in this dispensation, for he was in possession of the Urim and Thummim, and by virtue of this instrument, he could inquire of the Lord in relation to every case that should be brought before him for adjudication. The judgment of man is naturally very weak and imperfect, and inasmuch as Aaron was required to judge the people of God, it was of the utmost importance that all his decisions should be given in righteousness, that there should be no imperfections connected with them, and for that reason the Lord gave express instructions to Aaron, through his brother Moses, to have a breastplate. In this breastplate were 12 stones, representing the 12 tribes of Israel, and in the center of these rows of stones, the Urim and Thummim was placed, and when he was required to render judgment upon any matter, he inquired of the Lord through it, and was enabled to give decisions according to the word of the Lord. Orson Pratt, J.D. 19206. Joseph Smith. ... The prophet Joseph Smith had the Urim and Thummim and a breastplate, not with the same physical description as that of Moses, but was for similar purposes. The breastplate was used to carry the Urim and Thummim. The following description is given of Joseph's Urim and Thummim. By pressing the head a little forward, the rod held the Urim and Thummim before the eyes, much like a pair of spectacles. A pocket was prepared in the breastplate on the left side, immediately over the heart. When not in use, the Urim and Thummim was placed in the pocket, the rod being of just the right length to allow it to be deposited. This instrument could, however, be detached from the breastplate when away from home, but Joseph always used it in connection with the breastplate when translating, as it permitted him to have both hands free to touch the plates. The instrument was too large for Joseph's eyes. They must have been used by larger men. Sometimes Joseph Smith resorted to the plan of covering his eyes with a hat to exclude the light, in part to prevent eye strain. Saints Herald, March 9, 1882, page 258, interview with William P. Smith. Other types of instruments of divination with the powers of spiritualism have been known throughout the centuries. These instruments and gifts have been used for good and evil. Prophetical powers have been experienced by some individuals with unusual accuracy. Crystal stones. In England, for example, in 1467 a William Bigg was convicted of using a crystal stone to locate stolen property. Encyclopedia of Witchcraft, by R. Robbins, page 137. And among primitive peoples there is a widespread belief in the magical efficacy of quartz crystals, one of the most common of all luminous stones. These mineralogical specimens are frequently the main prop of the magician. They are used for this purpose by the Aborigines of Australia, Polynesia and North America, among others. Strange Superstitions and Magical Practices, by William Fielding, page 53. Clairvoyance. Michael Nostradamus, Michel de Notre Dame, was a French doctor who lived from 1503 to 1566, and was the personal physician to Charles IX of France. He was considered to be half Jew and half Spaniard. His prophecies were always written in verses of 4 lines. One of his prophecies was written about Henry II, which was, "In tourney strange young lion slays the old, scratching out eyes behind their cage of gold. Of both protagonists, 'tis one will die. In pain and agony." 4 years later, in a tournament, the king was wounded in the eye by a young nobleman. The nobleman's lance had pierced the king's golden visor, and the king lay in agony for a month before he died. A book of such verses by Nostradamus is quite well known and published in several languages. Emanuel Swedenborg, 1688 to 1772, was a Swedish inventor, mathematician, geologist, author and religious leader. In 1759 he had the following experience. Swedenborg was returning from England and had landed in Gothenburg. He was sitting at lunch with several leading citizens. Suddenly he became very disturbed and began telling them he could see Stockholm in flames. He even described certain houses and areas that were burning. Several days later a courier arrived from Stockholm, a distance of 300 kilometers, and brought news of a conflagration that had destroyed part of the town. Wizards That Peep and Mutter, by Paul Bauer, page 28. Swedenborg's visionary ability was internationally famous. Another strange incident is related about his seeing the fate of a Russian emperor. Professor Seer, who was a secretary in an embassy in Stockholm, gives a similar and equally striking example. An acquaintance of his, a man who feared God and loved the truth, had told him how, on July 17, 1762, the day on which the Russian Emperor, Peter III, died, he was at a social gathering in Amsterdam. Swedenborg was also there. In the middle of a conversation his face suddenly changed. He appeared to be far away, as if something extraordinary was happening before his eyes. As soon as he had recovered himself, they asked him what had happened. He did not want to say at first, but on being pressed he said, "At this very moment the Emperor Peter III has died in prison." He then described how it had happened and added, "Gentleme, and you have only to compare this day with the official announcement which will appear in the newspapers." That very day the Tsar had been overthrown in a revolt led by his wife and murdered. Wizards That Peep and Mutter, by Paul Bauer, page 28. Crystal balls. Stones, sticks, quartz crystals, and crystal balls are being used today as a medium through which pictures or visions are transmitted. In Washington, D.C., at the present time, resides the famous Jean Dixon, who often uses a crystal ball to see things of the past and future. She described the occasion in which she received her crystal ball. The gypsy was telling a woman's fortune with cards as Mrs. Pincart and her 8-year-old daughter arrived at the campsite. When Jean's turn came she took the child's hands, turned them over, and gasped. "This little girl is going to be very famous. She will be able to foresee worldwide changes because she is blessed with the gift of prophecy. Never have I seen such palm lines." The gypsy disappeared into her covered wagon and returned with a crystal ball. Handing it to Jean, she said, "It for you to keep. You will be able to meditate on this and see wonderful things in it, for the markings on your hands are those of a mystic." Jean eagerly peered into the shining new "TOY", and pictures began to form within it. Although television was unknown in those days, it was as if she were watching a TV screen. The Gift of Prophecy, by Ruth Montgomery, page 16 to 17. Today, however, the power of God's seers is rare and nearly unknown. The scarcity of divine seers marks the age of darkness and evil foretold by the ancient seers. The depth of apostasy and wickedness has caused a spiritual famine throughout the world, and is driving the Spirit of God from the earth.